Well, ladies and gentlemen, I find it remarkable that you all are still awake and we're ready to go one more time. One time a fellow fell asleep on the second row and the preacher said, "Hey, wake him up." And the fellow said, "You wake him up, you put him to sleep." And so we're coming to our last session. Our last session for today. We got 3 sessions tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. I've looked forward to today. Sooner or later, chances are you're going to find yourself behind a microphone. And you know what the number one fear is that people have? It's the fear of that microphone. The fear of this microphone. Number one fear. So many polls show it. I mean, you look at the surveys. Fear number 2, fear of death. And what this says is, I'd rather die than stand before a microphone. That's the way a lot of people are. And why is it that we have a fear of public speaking? Help me with some ideas. What are some reasons? Yeah, Travis.
I don't have any idea, really. I mean, because it does. I mean, yeah, it's fear. There's a fear to it, but there's nothing to it, really. So, I mean, what are you afraid you're going to do?
There's nothing to it if you don't have the fear.
Well, no, I mean, it works me up every time I get up, but it's just do it. You'll be fine. You're not going to say anything more stupid than you do any other day of the week.
You might. Okay. Look, what Travis just said, people don't want to look stupid. And that's one of the reasons they may fumble in front of a group, but that's one of the fears that people have. Yeah.
Fear of being asked a question that you don't have an answer.
Yeah, someone's going to ask you a question, you don't have an answer.
Basically what we've already said.
Randy.
Somebody once said it's better to remain silent before a fool to speak up as a walk out.
Yes. Okay, good observation.
I've always had a fear of public speaking since first or second grade school. I kind of wonder if it was something that happened back then and I don't even remember.
Yeah. Our culture seems to really build that fear in. I go to other cultures, like in Africa, nobody seems to have the fear of a microphone or fear of standing up before a crowd. I don't understand why the cultural difference, but there's something in our culture that says, you know, you really better be careful about standing up before a crowd. People think, I'll freeze up. I won't be able to say anything. I mean, there's all kinds of things that people have. And while we may or may not have a fear of public speaking, if we're going to be leaders in God's kingdom, sooner or later, we're probably going to have to stand up and speak up and address an audience. And experience shows that we're maybe not so good at that, okay? We're going to be on page 27 if you want to follow along in the lesson. And one of the reasons we may not be so good in front of the mic is that we're not well equipped. We're not trained to do it. So here, this is a little training session. And well, the women say, well, we're never going to be up there. Let me tell you 2 things that you can get out of this. First of all, ladies, your guys are going to be up there. And you can take them after services, take them home and say, now, you got up there and you did this, this, and this. Next time you get up, you can do better than that. You give them a word of encouragement. So you need to help your guys, whether it's your son or your husband or your dad or whoever. Secondly, ladies, you just might find yourself in a circumstance someday where you're asked to speak at a women's conference. And there you've got 500 women in front of you. There's a big thing in Dallas every year called WOW. Women of Worthiness, and it's put on by some Christians there in Dallas, and it's all women all day long, and no men allowed in the doors. And there are women who stand up and they speak to 400 or 500 other women. So there are some times when you women are going to find yourselves maybe in some kind of circumstance like that. And let me tell you that standing up to address a crowd does not come naturally to most of us. When I was in high school, I would take an F rather than give an oral book report. And the fear of the crowd is something I had to overcome in order to stand up and speak. And because we're not so good at standing up behind the microphone, a lot of announcements are bungled. A lot of sermons that might have helped people are never properly heard. Prayers have been unheard by the audience. Invitations impaired because of lack of training and poor use of the microphone. And listen, brothers and sisters, don't underestimate the importance of hearing. Romans 10:17, so then faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. What just happened there, Jim? I just sounded different. Did you turn me up so I'd be heard better? Is that what you did? Okay, yeah, Jim just got the point. I need to be turned up so I could be heard better. In Mark chapter 4 and verse 24, Jesus said to them, take heed what you hear. With the same measure you use, it will be measured to you. And to you who hear, more will be given. So take heed what you hear. Over in Luke chapter 8 and verse 18, it says, take heed how you hear. So take heed what you hear, take heed how you hear. The Bible puts a premium on hearing God's word. In 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 16, Paul told Timothy, take heed to yourself and to the doctrine. In doing this, you will both save yourself and those who hear you. So hearing is critically important. What I'm going to give you in the next couple of minutes here is what I call the 10 Commandments of the microphone. And you might even write in a few notes here or underline something that particularly sticks out to you. And I put the workbook together before I had my slides done, so my slides are going to vary slightly from what's in the workbook. And what I don't want you to do is just hear these things. I want to get buy-in. I want the men to say, the men who are going to lead in this congregation, I want you to say, yes, that's what I'm going to do. I accept this. I'm going to practice these things. And let me just say to you, if something is important for you to say, it's important for what? For the audience to hear. If it's important enough for you to say, it's important enough for the audience to hear. So here come the 10 Commandments of the microphone. First of all, use the mic. Don't assume that you can be heard without a mic. You know, I hate to say this, but when we modified this building, the building, the back wall used to end somewhere here, and we extended it out. And we actually had a higher ceiling, and we had a hard ceiling. It actually was easier to hear in this building before we expanded it. And what we put in were these tiles. Those are acoustic tiles that suck up all the sound. They absorb sound like a sponge absorbs water, and so voices don't carry very well in this building. If you build a new building, make sure you get a sound engineer to fix it so it does right. But here's the point. Someone says, well, I don't need a mic. When I stand up, my voice carries, everybody can hear me. Well, maybe that's true, but maybe it's not true. And listen, one of the reasons that men sometimes say, I don't need a mic, is because they're afraid of the mic. They're afraid of standing up in the first place, and now the mic gives them a double fear. And you know what they're going to be afraid? They're afraid they're going to hear themselves, and it scares them. But you need to use a mic. And you need to speak up when you use the mic. Don't assume that the mic is going to do all the work. Sometimes guys stand up and they immediately cut their voice down. They begin to say, they lower their volume. And a mic is not designed to do it for you. A microphone is an aid. It is to assist you. And listen, low conversational tones, speaking quietly like this. I don't know if you can hear me back there or not. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Jim just turned me up so you could hear me. Low conversational tones may work when you're talking to your sweetie sitting next to you. But when it comes time to use the mic, you need to speak up and you need to speak out and speak clearly. Speak clearly. When you address an audience, you're taking charge of the assembly. Think about that. That when you use a mic, you are the leader of the assembly for those few minutes, whether you're up speaking for 30 minutes or whether you're praying a prayer or whether you're making announcements, whatever you might be doing. You've got to speak up and speak clearly. You ever see someone get up and they start to mumble a few things under their breath? If you're going to say something, everybody needs to hear it. If you don't want everybody to hear it, then absolutely do not say it. But you need to articulate, enunciate, pronounce your words carefully. Don't run words together. We have had for the last several years, for about 15 years now, 16 years, we've had a training program at Dowland Road Church. And we've turned out some really good young men in preaching the gospel. We've got a young trainee right now. His name is Gabe Chavez. He is from Costa Rica. and he's here on a work permit, and he's in our training program, and Gabe talks real fast and runs all of his words together. And you can't tell one word from another. Now, when he gets up to preach, we work on him, slow it down, speak clearly, say every word clearly, because people need to hear. And listen, older folks, nearly all of us who are older, we've lost some of our hearing. My wife has been tested. She's lost some of her hearing. I've lost mine, a lot of it. And we depend on people speaking clearly. If you don't speak clearly, a lot of people are not going to hear what you have to say. Not only do you need to speak clearly, but like when you're reading the Bible, don't read the Bible like this. Because some of us older folks, we need to see your face. And so you read the Bible like this so I can see your face, because part of our hearing depends on what we see. And while we're not truly lip reading, we are picking up some of it by watching your face as you read. So speak clearly. That's important for those who've lost some of their ability to hear well. Number 4, keep your voice up. Don't drop it because you hear it coming back. And when I drop my voice a little bit, I hear Jim boosting me up a little bit. He does that every time I drop my voice a little bit. Okay? What happens is, as I speak in this auditorium, I ought to be a little bit conscious of the sound coming back to me. I ought to hear some of it coming back. Now, if I'm speaking too low and he's having to push me too far, what happens? What happens if he has to push it too high? You get feedback. Now we start to get squeal in the system, which is no good. And sometimes that's what happens at home in our congregation. A guy gets up there and, he hears his voice coming back. And so he immediately cuts his voice down. And the guy in the back boosts him up, and he cuts his voice down more. And now we get squeal in the system. Keep your voice up. Don't drop it because you hear it coming back. In any venue that is correctly set up, you should hear your voice coming back. Good speakers get used to that, and it becomes a tool for measuring your volume. And if you cannot hear your voice coming back, something is wrong. 1, you're not speaking with enough volume. 2, your mic is dead. 3, the sound system is inadequate for the venue, and that is often the case that we're working with inadequate sound systems. And then the next piece of advice on using the mic, speak to the back row. You know, I talk to Rick, I talk to Jeff, I talk to Brenda, those that are toward the back. I speak to them. I have to push my voice out. I have to project my voice. And you do that even if Mike has asked me a question, I'm answering Mike's question, but I'm speaking loud enough that the back row can hear. It's real easy just to talk to Mike like this and forget the rest of the people in the auditorium. And so you need to speak to the back row, push your voice out, think in terms of projecting your voice. And then when you've got a stationary mic, and your stationary mic that you have here, it will work if you're speaking like this. But if I'm over here speaking, and I speak to Bruce or to Travis, the mic is over here. They can't turn that up loud enough for it to be effective. Even if it's an omnidirectional mic. And really, in a pulpit, you should not use an omnidirectional. Omnidirectional has a pattern that it uses. In other words, you take the mic, and omnidirectional, it'll have a pattern like this. It picks up from all different directions. You don't want that because it's picking up a lot of stray sounds in the room, and it actually deteriorates the sound quality. In a pulpit, you want a mic that is singular in its direction, and one that you speak directly to. And when you're like there, and if it were like this, let me make this like a stationary mic. If it's mounted right here, I speak like this to the audience. If I want to talk to Mike, I need to rotate around this way. I can look at Mike and talk to him, but I'm still speaking directly at the mic. If I want to talk to Travis, I move like this, moving around that mic. What happens, though, and a lot of times, okay, Mike, we want you to do this. Travis, we'd like for you to do that. And now, because it is the mic is singular in its direction, now we're losing because I'm not talking to the mic any longer. Those are just some simple rules for using a microphone. And sometimes we just are unconscious of those simple rules that will help us to be heard more. Your volume if you've got a stationary mic like this one, and it's unidirectional, and it's right here, and I start talking to Mike like this, 60 to 80% of the volume will go away. And Jim is in the back pushing it, trying to get more volume, and he's going to get to the point where now the system starts to squeal. And so we can just do better on the mic. Practice using a mic. If you have a speech to give, practice using the microphone. Get used to hearing your voice coming back. And if at all possible, practice in the venue where you're going to be doing it. Listen, maybe you've got a scripture reading for tomorrow or next week, and you're not real used to using the microphone. You're not used to being before the crowd. Come early to services or stay after one of the other services and get up, and with the system turned on, you practice. You practice. And you hear your voice coming back. And now it's not so scary when you hear that happening. And listen, don't just assume that it's all going to work. You get up and you start to hear your voice come back, and it kind of scares you, and then you cut your voice down, and then you have problems. And it's important that you practice even in an empty auditorium. When our young guys at home speak for us, like tomorrow night, Gabe Chavez will be speaking from the 18th chapter of the book of Luke in talking about the blind man who was healed. And he has already presented that lesson at least 3 times to me or to David Banning, the man that I'm co-working with. He's presented that lesson to us. We're the only 2 people in an auditorium that'll seat 600 people. But we want him to hear his voice coming back. We want him to practice in the venue. And that's important in order to get used to the venue itself. A few years ago, I spoke up in Lufkin, Texas. They asked me to come and speak regarding what the Bible had to say about homosexuality. We had 500-600 people at the Civic Center in Lufkin, Texas. A huge crowd. I got there early. I got up and I wanted to use the microphone before anybody got there. I wanted to see what the auditorium looked like. That's important to me to do that, and I've had some experience at public speaking. And listen, if you're married, you got a wife and you got kids, you get up in the pulpit and practice, your wife and kids sit in the back and let them hear you. Can you hear me, son? Can you hear me, daughter? Wife, can you hear me in the back? You see, you want to practice and let them give you some feedback. Those are just things that will help us. Always do a mic check. Jim, last night, what did we do before we started? Want a mic check. Make sure this thing is working. How are the batteries? They haven't been in there too long, maybe. Okay? So we're going to check the batteries or insist on new batteries. You know what Jim did last night? Before I got up to speak, he put new batteries in. We made sure it was working. And you know what he did a little while ago? He changed the batteries again. I was speaking at the West Allen Church just north of Dallas in February of this year. And I spent 3.5 hours with the elders on Friday night talking about shepherding. Then all day Saturday from 9 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, talking with elders, deacons, and preacher. And, of course, we were just in a small room doing this work together, didn't need a mic in that room. But on Sunday morning, I'm now going to address the crowd in the Bible class hour. And they gave me the wireless mic. Is everything checked out? Is it all good? Is it all right? Yeah, it's all working. 3 minutes in, the batteries failed. 3 minutes in. Jim, come out of your room a minute, bud. If the batteries fail, what do you do, Jim? What do you do if the batteries fail? Can I speak loud enough that the people on the live stream will hear me? Maybe not. Now, we've got a backup system here. If this fails, we've already got something in place. I like the backup system idea. But what should have happened at that building is a deacon should have come to his feet and said, "Hold it, Brother Dawson, your batteries have just failed." And it was a poor sound system where you couldn't hear yourself coming back. And I didn't realize the batteries had failed. But they let it go on, and I wound up speaking 45 minutes, 42 of which There was no microphone. Now the people could still hear because I can project my voice. But that's not the way things should be. They need to get up and say, hold it, Brother Dawson, let's put some fresh batteries in. But, you know, someone says, hey, it's working, it's all fine. And I just, I like this idea of insisting on new batteries, okay? Check even if they tell you that it's all okay. I changed point number 10. Use a headset mic if possible. I will tell you, folks, these things are a pain. They're a pain in the neck, literally, okay? And they want to wobble around. The other kind, there's different kinds of headset mics. I was out in Arizona, I have to tell you this. I was in a big city in Arizona. I won't tell you which one. Maybe you know the congregation. I don't want something to get back out there. But they had the headset mic. And it was like a sportscaster's mic, like the guy calling a football game where it's a big black thing that goes over my head with a big clunky thing on this side, and on this side comes a big thing with a big black boom mic. People can't even see my mouth. And it was so, it looked so bad. I had to find a mirror and take a picture of myself wearing it because it was so wacky. But you know what? The people could hear me. And a headset mic works, and the reason why, if I turn my head down, and I begin to read the text here, where does my mic stay? It stays in the same position relative to my mouth, no matter what. Whereas if I'm wearing a clip-on, when I turn down like that, the volume goes up. If I turn aside to talk to Mike, and I've got the clip on, I'm turning away from my microphone. This is the best way to do it, but I will tell you these things, even this one is a simple one, only goes over one ear. It's uncomfortable. I don't like it. It's awkward. And frankly, I think it looks pretentious. But it's the trend now to go to this kind of mic because you are heard better. It works better than other microphones. And so I have acquiesced at home where we're using it. It's just the way things are going in that regard. Do any of these things, here's these 10 commandments, and look, these are just things that I've made up by observation and problems I've seen. Does any of this make sense to you? I hope it does. And these are rules that if you follow these, you will have a better assembly. And I'll tell you, there's one other thing that's not listed here. It's not about you speaking using a mic. It's the guy in the back. Jim, you have to be ready always. You need to cue the mic. Don't wait till I start to talk and then you turn me on. Have the mic queued up so first words out of my mouth are heard over the system. You have something you want to say, Jim?
Yeah, just like a while ago. This thing, it changes sometimes, and you don't know. I mean, you sounded like you went down, and why that came up so loud, I went to that other mic immediately. And when I went to that other mic, then the thing came back, and you had two mics.
Yeah, and of course when you're using two mics, they can be a little bit out of phase, and they can produce some funny sounds. You know,
Another thing you run into is, I wear hearing aids, there's 4 or 5 other people in here with hearing aids. Jeff has real sensitive ears. So I have to kind of play between what I think these people can hear and I can hear, what sounds normal to me, and Jeff will go, turn it down.
yeah.
Because he sounds loud to you.
And listen, the guy who runs the mic, the guy who controls the audio, is just like the guy who's in charge of the temperature. He can't please everybody. You have to find some kind of middle ground in order to make it work. Well, thank you for those comments, Jim. And listen, that church where I was in West Allen, it was just a weekend meeting, and the only time I spoke to the crowd was on Sunday. I did 3 lessons on Sunday, but then after I present a lesson, I'm standing in the back, and I cannot hear the preacher because the building was echoey. Everything was echo, sound bouncing, and it was all muddled. And I just told the brethren Sunday night, we went out to dinner after the sermon was over, and I said, brothers, you need to do something with your sound system because people like me who are hard of hearing, I couldn't hear when you were making your closing remarks. I heard a lot of noise, but I could not hear you. And the brother said, well, there's nothing we can do about it because we just spent $16,000 on our new sound system. And the brethren would scream to the high heavens if we had to spend any more. So we spent 16 grand and didn't get a system that works well. Maybe you need your money back. Because when a company comes in and is going to install a sound system, you don't pay them until they have got it and got it right. And I think what that building needed was probably some acoustics in the back of the auditorium, maybe on the side of the auditorium, that would soak up some of the sound. Because the auditorium was so live that everything was an echo, constant. And that created some issues and some problems. Well, maybe you can think of some more things that leaders need to know in using a mic. But it's important that a church have the right kind of sound system, one that can be easily heard by everyone in the auditorium. And churches should never use a surface mic. You know what a surface mic is? That's one that lays down on a table like this, and here's the man speaking, but the microphone is down here. Oh, it works fine, says the man who installed it. It works great. It'll pick up from anywhere in the auditorium. That's right, it'll pick up from everywhere in the auditorium, but it won't pick up anyone well. And all the recordings that are done with a surface mic, whether it's here or whether it's in the pulpit, they all sound like someone talking in a drum. We've got to do quality work. God's work requires that we do quality work. And our work is the most important in the world. We can't cut corners on equipment. Some churches build $2 million buildings and install Mickey Mouse AV equipment. They might as well gone to Radio Shack and spend $100 on a speaker and a mic and an amplifier, and there you go, because they don't have something that works. We've got to remind ourselves once again that we're striving for excellence. Okay, I've got one more thing I need to do. And just say this, the better you communicate, the better you lead. And I want to share some thoughts on personal preparation before you speak to a crowd. You ever sat through a really boring sermon? Raise your hand if you've ever done that. Maybe you get a chance to do it tomorrow, okay? You know, I heard chuckles, and the response is always the same when we ask a question like that. The audience chuckles in a moment of understanding. They raise their hands. We've all experienced that. And raise your hand again if you raised your hand a moment ago. Raise your hand again if you've ever sat through. Yeah, look around. Look around before you look around. Look at all the hands that are up. Almost all the hands are in the air. Okay, every hand that is raised is a missed opportunity. Put your hands down, okay? Someone could have been brought closer to Jesus, but they weren't. Someone could have become a Christian, but they didn't. A family could have been made stronger, but it wasn't. A church could have taken a step forward, but it didn't. We'll never know what could have been. Every hand raised was a missed opportunity of one sort or another. That's the price that we pay when the truth is not communicated in an effective way. It's why communication is always a critical thing in the life of a leader. The better you communicate, the better you will lead. The ability to communicate clearly and in a way that impacts people is vital. Jesus impacted thousands. In Matthew chapter 5, there's this huge multitude there on the side of the mountain, and he's going to address those people. At some point, a leader has to stand up, and he has to speak up. And he has to say, here is where we're going, here's what we're going to do, and here is why. Now follow me. Leadership comes with a microphone. And it's inescapable in our time. And someone says, well, in ancient times they didn't have microphones. Did you know that the buildings and venues were built for audio? Did you know that? They didn't have microphones. You see these amphitheaters. I've been to Caesarea. I've been to Jerusalem. I've been to 3 or 4 cities in Israel where they had these amphitheaters. And they were designed in such a way that they would capture sound. And even when Jesus spoke on the side of the mountain, he was speaking in a venue where his voice could be heard, where it could carry. You can't speak to 5,000 people without having a situation where the voice is going to carry. And so these ancient peoples understood a lot more than we give them credit for when it came to public speaking. But sooner or later, you're going to have to speak publicly. For most of us, that's the way it is. It's an unavoidable truth. And public speaking and communication, it comes easier for some folks than for others, but it's not an easy, no-effort process. It requires work. Okay? And you know what? You might have a lot of great ideas to share, but because you don't communicate well and people can't hear you, your ideas are never heard. Let me talk about some things about preparation. These are 4 questions to help you in preparation. And this is for men or for women who might have to speak at some women's venue. 4 questions to help you in preparation. What does your preparation process look like? I suggest that you never try to wing a speech without preparation. And I know of some guys who try that, and they don't do well. And I'm being careful here not to specify anyone. I've seen men try it. Oh yeah, I know my material. Have you practiced it? What kind of preparation have you really done? You just collected a bunch of data, and you're just going to stand up and spout data without any structure, without any organization? Don't try to wing a speech without preparation. With some people, they have to write it out word for word, like a manuscript. Others outline their points in some logical way, with structure and with proper organization. When do you begin your preparation? Are we going to be like the high school kid that says, I got 6 weeks on this report, I got 6 weeks to get ready, and then we do all the work the night before and stay up half the night to do it? There aren't any necessarily right or wrong answers to this. But here's the point. Preparation requires a lot of work. And so if you're going to speak, you've got to prep yourself in plenty of time. Do you get feedback before you present it? When our young preacher Gabe Chavez preaches tomorrow night, he will have gotten at least 3 or 4 sessions with me and with David Banning on his lesson before he ever speaks to the congregation. It's also valuable for men making Lord's Supper talks or invitations at the end of services. What you can do if you're doing the Lord's Supper, giving a talk, stand in front of a mirror and give your talk. Stand in front of your family and give your talk, and get some feedback from your family. Preparation. Get some feedback before you get up to say it. Let someone else hear what you have to say, and ask them how you can make it better. And so I really strongly recommend that, especially if you're going to do some preaching. Number 3, do you practice it aloud before preaching it? You know, there are some people who think it's anti-spiritual to practice your lesson. I remember, though, an old preacher, his name was Benjamin Franklin, not the statesman, but an old preacher who wrote a book about preaching. And he said, boys, if you want to preach, get yourself a Bible, work up your lesson, go out in the woods and find a stump that's your pulpit, and you preach it to the trees. And you preach it to the trees until you get it right. And there's some real wisdom in that. You need to hear yourself say it. What you may look at in an outline on a piece of paper, or what you may look at in your Bible when you see the verse, is not the same as you saying it. You need to be able to say it, and you need to hear yourself say it. And how many times should you do it out loud? Well, how well do you want to do it? And we require our young man, Gabe, who will preach tomorrow night. David and I have heard him 3 or 4 times, and we've told him you need to practice it at least 6 more times without anyone there. Just so you work through all the rough spots, work through your transitions, and work with it so you know your material forward and backward, and you don't stumble over your words. Don't think that when you get up that somehow God is going to give you the words. You are not an apostle, okay? In Matthew chapter 10, verses 19 and 20, Jesus is talking to those men, and he said, when they call you before kings and authorities, don't give any thought to what you're going to say, because it will be given to you in that hour what you need to say. Well, that's not you. And so you have to practice. You have to figure out what you're going to say in advance. So practice it aloud. You need to hear yourself saying it. Number 4, how much time do you devote to practice versus development? There's no right or wrong answer to that. No matter how well the material's been developed, if it's not presented well, it's not going to be of very much value to the hearers. In most cases, speakers spend more time developing than on practicing their presentation. That's reasonable and logical, but don't neglect practice. At home, we require trainees 4 to 6 times you've got to practice.
Entire lesson that you gave me here reminds me of everything I was ever taught, because I was a musician in high school and college. Everything I was ever taught was pretty much the thought behind each one of these points. We were required to be in a practice room and play against a wall, so we were never afraid of the sound coming back at us. We were required to do it in such a way that, you know, we can hear the little inflections, distortions, direction of the music itself. Even in the marching band, we had instructors get way up on scissor lifts because they wanted us to have the sound here or here or here, and we had to practice that without being afraid of what it sounds like when it comes back.
Why all that practice?
So we get it right.
So you get it right.
The presentation is constructed.
If that's important for a marching band, that you get it right, why is it not important for us?
Exactly.
That is the point. We ought to be striving for excellence.
Right.
We serve an excellent God. Why would we give God something less than our best?
Right. Don't be afraid of your voice, like you were saying, coming back at you.
Yeah.
When we heard it come back to us, it was 3 seconds after we played it, so some people had the tendency of thinking that's the music we're playing at that time. They get lost in the shuffle of their own sound, coming back. Don't get lost in the own shuffle of your voice coming back to you, or the distraction.
You're double clutching, okay? If you drive a standard, sometimes you're ready to put it into second and it wants to grind, so you have to put the clutch in a second time and then let it out and put it into second. Double clutching you sometimes have to do in a car. And listen, there's no such thing as a perfect presentation. I expect Jesus gave perfect presentations. I believe that. But for the rest of us, we're gonna fumble some. But that doesn't mean that it's okay to just get up and it doesn't make any difference. You know, it's kind of like driving a car. I'm a car guy. I kind of relate every illustration to cars sooner or later. Can you drive a car perfectly and never make a mistake? No, you're going to make mistakes sometimes. And the fact that you make mistakes sometimes doesn't mean that it's okay to just drive any way you want. Sometimes you're going to drift over that white line and you're going to hear the rumble strip. And so you correct yourself when you make a mistake. That's what we do as speakers. We correct ourselves if we make a mistake. But we can't just say, well, since you can't be perfect, it doesn't make any difference what you do. Anything goes, doesn't go. Who else got an observation or question? Yeah, Phil?
Just that one line you have up there, the better you communicate, the better you lead. The majority of our communications is not public. The majority of our communication is one-on-one, with 2 of us talking. And I think that line still works with that. The better we communicate with each other, the better you can lead.
Yeah, we want to communicate not just in public speaking, but we want to communicate well in all situations. One of my favorite movies has a line in it, what we have here to communicate. What's the movie? Cool Hand Luke. My favorite scene is the egg eating scene. there's something communicated there that maybe is not so hot. But failure to communicate. We often fail to communicate like we want. We can do a better job. That's what this lesson is about. That's why 10 Commandments of the microphone. Anyone else? Final comment or question? We're going to wrap it up, folks. And here we are about a half an hour early, okay? We did 5 lessons today, and that's probably enough. Tomorrow we've got 3 lessons. They're all titled the same. Surviving and Thriving in the 21st Century. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. And I hope you'll be present for all of those. Is there any final word that anyone needs to make? Any final thing? Paul, would you want to dismiss us in prayer? Let's stand and be dismissed. Thank you all. God bless you.